All right, we are going to be checking out this article, Your Manager is Not Your Best Friend. Now, I think this is interesting because I used to have this mindset until I met my first manager for my first dev position. And so I kind of have mixed feelings about this. So I want to see where this author is going with this and kind of just share my experience too. So, as people become managers, it's quite common for their team members to want to commiserate with them, like sympathize with them. This is especially true for friendly, competent, reasonable seeming managers. People want to commiserate with winners. This makes commiseration extra dangerous as it comes with a hint of flattery. I respect your opinion and trust your discretion. But commiseration, especially with your direct reports, is organizational poison. It erodes the fabric of an organization and builds factions. It leads to feelings of superiority and creates a low trust environment. Why would it lead to feelings of superiority? Because you have a stronger connection with your manager? Even if what you're complaining about is made up, worst of all, it doesn't give other teams an opportunity to improve. If I think that HR sucks and I commiserate with my directs about it, my team is going to treat them poorly. HR will never know why, will never fix the problem, and will just think that my team are jerks, and they'll arguably be right. Are you the manager or the employee in this situation? Commiseration is self-fulfilling because it's a form of victimhood. The world is conspiring against us, the only truly virtuous team. I'm going to keep reading. I feel like maybe I'll gather more context as I get further. Commiseration comes naturally to most people because it happens all the time in real life. As your best friend, if you come to me saying that you were just dumped by your girlfriend, you will get unconditional sympathy beyond words. No. I mean, me and my best friends, we're pretty authentic and honest with each other. I think it just depends on who you are, who your friends are. But I think you can have strong relationships that are very honest. You're the best. She didn't deserve you. You can do so much better. Everyone knows you're the man. No, those are friends. Those aren't best friends, in my opinion, or at least in my experience. Those are just kind of acquaintances that don't really have a lot to gain by just being candid and honest with you. So you can kind of create rapport through empathy and sympathy, which is even worse. Like the goal is just to oh, you know what? They are just looking for sympathy, so I'm just going to give them sympathy when not everyone needs sympathy at that time. They could. Sometimes they just want to vent, but I feel like the strongest relationships are ones where, yeah, they'll listen to you, but they're not going to just bullshit you. So I kind of want to see where this author is going, because I don't know if I agree with this at all, or even their definition of strong relationships or the representation of them. There will be no questions. There will be no need for you to explain anything about the situation, even if all you did for the last 2 years was sit on your couch smoking weed and playing Warzone. Greg, unless you did something totally crazy or illegal, my loyalty will be immediate and unconditional. Loyalty isn't about lying to your friends. Because let's be real, none of it matters. That's the perspective I would expect from an acquaintance. They don't really have anything to gain from being candid and blunt, which might upset me, so they cater to me, right? They just sympathize. Those are acquaintances. Those aren't best friends. You're going your way, she's going hers, and it's over. Okay, so that's what doesn't matter specifically. As a manager, your empathy needs to be highly conditional. Your job is to get to the truth of the matter in a respectful way, not make your team feel good. You are largely stuck with your coworkers, so I think you're the manager and you're sharing your experience as a manager. You are largely stuck with your coworkers and you need to get stuff done together or everyone suffers. If you break up with your girlfriend, you get unconditional sympathy. But if you break up with your girlfriend and the three of us were trying to climb Mount Everest together, I'm going to be a lot more measured in how I communicate and balance your relationship so that we can all survive the next few days. Okay, so this is a part I agree with, right? So what do you have to really gain as a manager from being honest about a situation when you're kind of, I think your management style is to appease a little bit, right? You don't want to have that brutally honest conversation, which you can have in a way that like has them on your side. Like you can have an empathetic conversation, let the emotions out, let your employees vent, and then once their emotion is out, then we can have a more logical conversation. I think that's a way more effective way to manage. It sounds like what you're doing is just trying to appease and just get by. And I think you can build stronger relationships with your employee by going past that. Commiseration is generally a sensitive topic, so I've tried to boil down how to handle situations when a direct comes to you with grievances via some heuristics. You don't really want to debate your team in every situation, but your job is to essentially be a scientist and get to the bottom of what's going on. If someone wants to commiserate about some other team, your first job is to ask a bunch of questions about what's going on. Right, so you want to gather information. I would even argue, like, you can... Sometimes it's hard to gather information if they're emotional. They're not going to give you less biased information while they're still in their emotions. So I think letting them vent and hearing them out isn't, you don't have to like validate like, oh yeah, that team, I can't believe they did that. Like you're not the drama queen that just edges it on. You're someone that just like empathizes with how they're feeling. You get their feelings out, let them vent. They're frustrated with this employee. They're frustrated with this team, and then have a logical conversation. I guess that's how I would approach it. But I do like wanting to get as much information as possible, but I don't think you're going to get that immediately. So 90% of the time, the situation is a gray area, and probably 30% of the time, the person wants to commiserate is actually in the wrong on balance. And yeah, that's the tough thing when like you immediately start forming opinions, which could be right, about how maybe they're just being unreasonable about it. And right away, you pick up on that. But the initial, like, they don't see it that way right away. And if you want to build rapport, you want to build trust with your employees, like, let them vent, get that out. Now let's have that logical conversation afterwards. Your role as a manager is also to be a perspective creator. Sure, that salesperson was overly optimistic on how impactful this custom feature was for a prospect. And sure, the deal wasn't as large and didn't close as quickly as they said it would. But sales incentives are a law of the universe, and sales directors need to manage around them just as much as product teams do, because not having sales incentives is even worse. By the way, we're not so great at estimating development timelines either. Everyone's blood pressure should always be lower after they've spoken to you. Bad therapists just let you rant. Good therapists let you vent, but they ask clarifying questions, and they sometimes push back. So yes, I haven't, like, if you would have applied that in any of your representation and how you handle these social interactions above, I think we'd be on the same page. But this is the very first time I'm seeing this, and I'm wondering if this is just something like insight you have that you're not actually applying in your conversations. The phrase, "Is that actually true, or can you explain that more?" are your friends. Okay. Good therapists validate feelings, but they don't necessarily validate facts. I know you feel like you're being a good daughter is not the same as you are the best daughter. You want to be a good therapist. Okay, I'm with you on this. Remove the phrase, "I don't know why they," from your lexicon. No matter how you end a sentence, the subtext will be clear. I don't know why they're so incompetent. Instead, it's often better to give the most optimistic view for why another team is behaving the way that they are. Might not be right, but it builds empathy, which is a bedrock on which productive collaboration is built. And awesome. So we go back to you being a perspective creator. And I think you can kind of help steer people in that direction eventually. And I think that's great. Yes. If someone is trying to get you to commiserate with them, try to speak in terms of reiterating a decision framework rather than marketing doesn't know what they're doing. This is just garbage. These statements, like, the feelings can be valid, but like, you hear a lot of statements like this when people are emotional. They're in that emotional state, and you want to get that out of them. You want to say something like, our role is to build a product and have a strong POV for marketing, and their role is to make sure that our launch generates enough pipeline. If you don't think that's going to happen, then let's talk to them. The goal is to focus on objective truths rather than disparaging opinions. So I do like this reroute. I think it's okay to humor this. Like, if you're having, like, you know, if you're in a stand-up or whatever, and you have people making these disparaging remarks about other departments, that's inappropriate. They shouldn't be doing that. Not in a non-constructive way like this. So I like that you've acknowledged that. That's important. But you can let people vent like this to start off the conversation and validate their feelings, and then start expanding with, okay, why do you feel like they don't know what they're doing? Was there a specific situation that happened? I want to hear about it, right? And you continue digging in and digging in and digging in and letting them vent and letting them vent. And I think this is actually really healthy in a one-on-one setting, not when you are disparaging people in front of others. Like, if it's a one-on-one conversation with your manager, I think that's fine. And the manager is going to this is something they are going to want to work with you with, because this kind of communication is very poisonous if done in the wrong setting. But I think this is a completely valid feeling. A lot of people think like this when they're emotional. When it comes to commiseration, people are highly attuned to nuanced communication, especially from their boss. Well, guys, we've got this, plus that little head nod and eye roll is functionally the equivalent of saying it's all on us, the protagonist, because everyone else is a fucking idiot again. Those words didn't literally leave your mouth, but you effectively said it, and as a manager, that's 100% on you. As a manager, your implicit communication is just as important as your explicit communication. This is not a courtroom. This is real life, and nonverbal actions can still have consequences. Yes, 100% agree with this. One of the most common people to commiserate about is your old, but yeah, don't do this, your old boss or the company's CEO. This can get highly toxic fast. This is rarely actually productive. Cases of teams changing their CEO's behavior through commiseration are vanishingly rare. The right way to pivot this conversation, or at least the only way I've seen this play out positively, is to discuss how you can most effectively work with your boss. This is significantly more productive, and even if you still think they're being dumb, at least you're tackling the problem constructively. Okay? Of course, sometimes people really are AAA grade idiots. When this happens, your communication should typically address the issue, not the other team. For most situations, it's best to say, let me follow up, rather than I agree that you're dumb. In particular, egregious cases, you can go with, I know this is a problem and I'll get on it, or I hear you, I'm working on it, but I can't give you every detail on how, and don't expect ongoing updates. This avoids gaslighting them that everything is fine, but it also stops the vent session. I think a vent session is okay. There are employees that just need to vent a little bit more. I think they need to take ownership over needing to vent to their boss over and over. Like, if it becomes a pattern, that is a problem, and you want to try to work them past that, right? But there are just some people that are really emotional that are really good employees. I've had employees like that, and I'm not going to fire them. They're really good. They brought in revenue. They cared about the customers, but their energy just got sucked out of them very quickly with other employees. Like, they just didn't really have the resilience to be, like, the emotional resilience to be able to handle disagreements and stuff like that. And it's something that I'm thinking of one employee in particular, and it's something that she started getting better at. But some employees are worth keeping that are like that. And if you don't think they're worth keeping, that's on you as a manager to make that decision. But I don't think someone's emotional fragility, especially when it's temporary, I don't think that affects my decision to want to get rid of them or completely not listen to them. I find it just way more effective to let them vent, and then I can have a logical conversation about the reality of the situation, the facts of the situation, where now that we've built rapport, we've built more trust, that I at least can showcase that I understand where they're coming from, and I take it upon myself to do that, and I actually care to do that. Now I have their trust to be able to give effective feedback that does refocus, that does pivot towards the facts. I mean, this is a strategy I used at the crisis center, right? You get people that would call in extremely emotional, and I've carried that over into my management style. And this is just my style. Everyone's going to have their own style, but I find that like some people just have a lot of emotion, and the way to get it out is to let them vent, to empathize, to understand where they're coming from in an appropriate one-on-one situation, not in front of other people talking shit, but a one-on-one, and then start having a more logical conversation. It feels like, and even the way that you're talking about it, like you say, of course, some people really are AAA grade idiots. I think you're more about, and just from this small article, I think you're more about going through the motions and being an effective manager by doing the right things, but not having the right mindset, not really building strong relationships with your employees to be able to build that trust, to be able to build that rapport. I've just had really good managers that I've learned that from too, that truly, like, I could vent to them about a situation. And of course, I'm not going to just completely trash talk someone. That's on me. I don't want to give that perspective off that, like, I'm just bad mouthing everyone, because then what happens with my manager and me, and we have a disagreement? Are they going to think that I'm just going to badmouth them? Am I like poisoning the well there? I think it is on the employee to be careful about how they word things, but still, like, sometimes people just need to vent and get it out. But it seems like you're kind of just like trying to be effective as a manager, but not really trying to build trust and strong relationships with your employees. To an extent, I agree with the title. Fully agree with this title. Your manager is not your best friend. I don't think this actually reflects what we're talking about here. Like, when I had a manager, they were not my best friend. When I was a manager, I was not best friends with any of my employees. This is very true, but these are two very different things. And I feel like, again, I feel like you could really be a much more, I wouldn't even say effective, but you could be a manager that people like have a ton of respect for and a ton of empathy for, and like would transfer companies with you, right? Like, you quit, they would come with you. Like, these kind of relationships are built through that rapport that I think you might be not pursuing. And maybe it's worth trying that. I don't know what your emotional capacity is to be able to handle these kind of conversations, because some people, like, it can be annoying when people are just like diving into victimhood, right? But when it comes to like a manager, an employee relationship, I do think it's helpful to let them vent a little bit. Either way, following up is the ideal next step because it commits you to respond but separates the emotion from the action. Accumulated strong emotions leave a strong impression, especially when they're negative emotions like bitterness, so it's best to suck the emotion out of the conversation as fast as possible. Okay, so that's why you're almost like trying to get past it. That's not what a therapist does. That's not what an effective therapist does, since you brought it up. You're letting all the emotion come out that needs to come out, and you're taking the time to let that come out. what you're doing is not really letting someone express themselves. Like if it's a one-on-one conversation, you're not letting them express themselves as much as they need to be able to create that strong connection with you, but also to be able to think more clearly for themselves so that they can use that situation to grow from, right? Because you need to. You can't just have a vent session every single time. It needs to be a vent session. Then we get into a more logical conversation. You need to pair both, but you need to give that first part the time it needs. And it seems like you're trying to skip past it. So I don't know if you're uncomfortable with negative emotions, which is reasonable, but I think you're skipping past a really important piece of it, of like helping them grow. For evidence of this, light autists often make very effective managers. Okay. What is the actual evidence? You're making an assumption. What is the actual evidence? Finally, we're all human here, and sometimes you need to commiserate with someone before your head explodes. If you must commiserate, it's almost always best if they're your peer, and they're not on your direct team. You don't share a boss. This is at least dodges the situation where a manager complains alongside their team and thereby implicitly blesses their most negative views. So as a manager, I don't think you're doing the complaining. You can empathize, you can let people vent, and you can get them past it, have a logical conversation without you taking that into how you communicate with other people. And this is actually a really tough thing to do as a manager, and it takes a lot of emotional control, something I continue to work on. Like, I haven't had a management position in a while, but it's something that I did work on when I did have that. But it's something that, like, having this emotional control to be able to handle that negative emotional energy is really helpful. It's something I do with, like, my mentorship sessions. Some people do just want to vent. I think they're a little bit different because they're like one-off sessions. So I don't actually think that's a good example because I'm only spending like an hour with them, not 40 hours a week with them. So I do try to make it a little bit more constructive. But I get like, so I would argue that I'd really encourage managers to try like give into that vent session, hear it out. You can have guidelines. Like, we're not just going to say this person's a piece of shit. Like, we can be somewhat reasonable about it and not really toxic, and you could still get those emotions out. But some of the best and strongest relationships that I've even heard with other people with their managers are managers that truly do empathize and listen and let them vent. If it becomes a pattern and you're just doing it over and over and over, you might have to establish a boundary. It's like, listen, like, I'm still your manager. I don't think it's actually healthy for either of us for us to have these one-on-one sessions for you just to trash talk the other departments. We got to get you past this, right? Like, this is, you want to continue to build them up to have that emotional resiliency so that they can think more clearly and logically, and they don't get caught in their emotions and get, hold up the project because of their emotions. And like, it's where it starts blocking their performance. It becomes a real issue. But I would encourage you to just let that venting unfold and give it the time it needs to. I think you're skipping past it too much. So this article ended up being a little bit different than I expected. And I think that's okay. But the reason why I picked it was because my first dev manager, I would argue, was more of a friend than a manager, for better or worse. But I play games with them like every week. Right now we're playing World of Warcraft. I got him to play that. I don't know how, but I did. We're playing World of Warcraft hardcore. And I think obviously we're friends. I don't think we're best friends. And this is where the title is a bit misleading. Maybe you're implying that like I think like the definition of best friend we just completely disagree with. And I don't think loyalty, and this is also true for like manager, like if you want to be loyal to your employees and look out for them and protect them, right? You argue up and you support down. If you want to be loyal in that way, that doesn't mean that you have to be unconditional in like just praising them and agreeing with them all the time. I think your definition of best friend, I guess, is just very different than mine. But I think this is interesting because you can build strong relationships with your manager. You always have to understand. I don't agree with your definition, but I do agree with the statement. Your manager is not your best friend. They are your manager first and your friends second. And you should never forget that. But I think sometimes you do get fortunate and you get a friend first and a manager second. At least with me, I think that gave someone like me who is resourceful, who is going to be critical on myself, and who is going to build myself up. And I spent a ton of time out of work coding and just wanting to be a good software engineer. I didn't really need someone to be critical of like a lot of the things that I did. I was critical enough of myself and I kept growing as a software engineer. And so maybe that benefited me in the beginning. Maybe I didn't get the code reviews. Maybe I could have grown faster if he would have been more critical of my work. I did get a lot of praise for my work, and I did feel like there were some times where I wanted more feedback. So I can make the argument that maybe he could have been a little bit more critical at times, but it worked out. And my progression, in a short period, is a little less than 3 years in the industry. My short progression was pretty good on the front end. And I mean, the responsibility jumped up quite a bit into that third position, but it's because I just kept growing. Some people need a certain style of, some employees need a certain style of management. They benefit from a certain style of management. Some employees are a little bit emotional and do need someone who isn't trying to be their best friend in your definition and just let them trash talk all of the different departments, where they can kind of redirect the conversation into something more productive or constructive, or at least redirect it if it's getting too out of bounds, which I think is maybe what you meant by that implication of like slight autism, like helps you be a good manager. I would have loved to see evidence of that, because I think that's an interesting statement. I just saw no evidence of that. And I think this is kind of controversial because sometimes you hear otherwise. I just wanted to state, yes, they're your manager first, your friends second. I think you could be friends with your manager. I think you can literally still be friends with your manager after they fire you. That's not easy to handle emotionally. Sometimes the firings just come from above. Sometimes the layoffs just come from above. Right? It depends on the reason you were fired, the reason you were let go. Of course it does. But even in that extreme situation where you got to be let go, it doesn't mean that manager doesn't care about you and empathize and lose a ton of sleep because they're kind of forced between to choose two employees. And yeah, I mean, it's I don't think a good friend, honestly, is going to keep you at that position if you aren't making the company money, if you aren't a great employee. I think they should obviously work with you, but I think friendship and your work relationship can be two separate things. That's what I'm saying. And I think if you allow it to be two separate things and understand there is a business relationship I have with this person and a friendship I have with this person, and you let the business relationship, you kind of understand that dynamic. You understand the conversation you need to have at that moment. Is it a business conversation? Is it a friendship conversation? I think that actually takes a lot of emotional maturity to be able to handle that. But if you can, you can build some strong relationships in your workplace with people a little bit higher up. And I think a lot of these benefits for your career that can come out of building up your relationship with people higher up in your company often comes from an authentic place where you both kind of just vibe, right? you connect on something. You always understand there's this business dynamic there, but you still give yourself room to connect on a more personal level. And I think some people don't allow themselves to do that, or their anxiety prevents them from doing that. And I think you're just missing out. I think you're seeing a very narrow perspective on the relationships that you can develop at work. And I honestly think you could become friends with your manager, and it'll only help you to do so if you two vibe like that. I'm not saying you should strive to become friends with every single manager, but some personalities just click. Let that happen naturally. Understand that they may have to fire you one day, so they're not going to be your best friend, but still be willing to open yourself up to those connections. And I think you're actually going to play even politics and better yourself and your trajectory within that company by building authentic, empathetic relationships with your higher ups and with people around you and in different departments. Obviously, like, you feel more comfortable doing that, but I wouldn't shy away from like letting a friendship naturally blossom with your manager. So I thought this is interesting that it was a perspective of a manager. I think we would handle these situations a little bit differently. If you're a manager, I would encourage you to open yourself up to let people vent a little bit more, so you can build the trust, so that then they are more receptive to what you have to say. When people feel heard, that's when they start opening up to feedback. And if you're just trying to skip past truly hearing them, I don't think they're as open to your feedback as you think they are.